It's Wednesday, the third day of January in 2024. And of course, there is a lot of news that is continuing, including sad news in the world as well. At least 103 were killed in the blast near Iranian military commander um, Qasem Soleimani's grave. So, Iranian media is reporting that at least 103 were killed and 141 were injured in the explosion near that grave of that particular general, and all along those lines. So, it was actually near his tomb and all in that way. Hamas deputy leader Salih al Arari was apparently killed in a Beirut blast, and apparently he was the linchpin of the relationship with Iran and Hezbollah. So that is definitely something that is coming across the news, as well as how safety rules were written in blood saved lives in the Tokyo plane crash is something else that we're seeing in the news as well. And Japan plane crash shows Coast Guard not cleared for runway and all in that space, but apparently order and calm eased evacuation from the burning Japan Airlines jet. So definitely there are a lot of details that are coming out about that particular news item as well. So definitely that is something we are seeing, as well as the Japan quake toll rises as rescuers struggle to reach cut off villagers or cut off folks in various villages in that particular country as well. And Russia has fired hypersonic ballistic missiles at Ukraine's two largest cities, leaving five dead and at least 130 injured in that war and everything. And Ukraine has attacked Crimea and Russia as the aerial assaults escalate. So that is something else that is going on. And Iran is praising Houthi proxy group raiding the U.S. military assets, and that is something that else that we're seeing. And Maersk has suspended shipping through the key Red Sea maritime trade route until further notice. So that is something else that we are seeing in the news, as a Malta-flagged container ship reported seeing three explosions toward its port quarter off of Yemen. And I do know that there are some folks that are fearful that this war may be escalating and getting even bigger, and all along those lines. And the U.S. has slammed the Israeli minister's statement on resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. And Israel is in talks with Congo and other countries on Gaza voluntary migration plan. So France says Smotrich and Ben Giver are fueling tensions with resettlement talk. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. So definitely there's a lot of things going on in the news, including the fact that over there in the UK, thousands of doctors in Britain have walked off the job in their longest ever strike. So that is something else that is going on, as and apparently Dorset doctor described the strike action as a necessity. So that is something else that we are seeing there in London. And there are some folks that are saying that the doctors walk out could definitely be giving Sunak a healthy headache, and all in that space. And speaking of hospitals, the U.S. now believes that Hamas used Al Shifa Hospital but evacuated before the Israeli operation. So there is U.S. intelligence that's saying that Hamas used the Gaza hospital as a command center. So that is something else that is going on in the news and all in that space. And it does look like Sheikh Hasina once fought for democracy in Bangladesh, and now her critics are saying that she now is one of those that threatens democracy. So that is something else that is in the news, and it looks like she is looking for a fourth term. And some folks are seeing that if that happens, that there could be some tighten things going on in that part of the world. And definitely, as I mentioned, Israel is definitely in the news. But one thing interesting about Israel being in the news is that South Africa has filed a genocide case against Israel. And apparently, this is going to set up a high stakes legal battle at the UN's top court. And I know that some of the folks, even here on this network, don't think that the UN has much authority or much legs to stand on, and all along those lines. But it'll be interesting to see what folks have to say about this latest effort, and whether this particular case against Israel will even stop the war in Gaza and what other folks think about this particular situation. And the UN Security Council is likely to meet on today to talk about the Red Sea, according to a French UN envoy. So the UN will be holding an emergency meeting on Red Sea security amid escalating Houthi attacks. So definitely that is something else that we are seeing as well. And even though it is known for being a cold weather area and everything, the extreme cold is gripping the Nordics. And apparently they broke a 25-year record in Sweden for they have definitely shattered a record as it is getting cold there. We might get a little bit chilly here, but not anywhere near true winter temperatures and all along those lines, here being, of course, Durham, North Carolina, and all in that space. And Ethiopia and a breakaway Somali region have signed a deal that apparently is going to give Ethiopia access to parts of Somalia and all along those lines. So definitely be interested to see what our panelists have to say about what's going on in the African nations as well. So definitely I did hear some people pop in, getting ready to get to them to see what their thoughts are about a number of the things that I have brought up and all in that way. Taiwan is saying that it has spotted a Chinese balloon over the island near a major air base as well. So definitely that is something else that is in the news and all along those lines. So definitely we'll be seeing what else is going on. And DeSantis as dismissing Ramaswamy's call to withdraw as just absurd. So apparently Ramaswamy is at it again, and he was asking DeSantis to withdraw. And I guess DeSantis is saying that he is not going to do that, and all along those lines. So it'll be definitely interesting to see what happens in that particular way and all along those lines. And definitely does look like Trump and the 14th Amendment are going to put the Supreme Court on the spot as well. So definitely it does look like there are several efforts to remove Trump from the 2024 ballot. We've definitely heard about the one that were successful in Colorado and in Maine. And definitely that will be something else that will be talked about as well. And of course, as we were talking about on World Politics, the Harvard president, Claudine Gay, has resigned. So definitely there are some folks that are very happy about that, and I'll be waiting to see about the third president and that spoke in front of Congress and that above a university, and to see what they are going to see about how they are going to handle it. As two of them, I believe that would be now Providence and Harvard, have stepped down, and I forgot where the third one was from, but now I'm sure there'll be pressure for them to resign as well. And then we'll also see how the university reacts with whoever they decide to appoint next and all along those lines. So definitely it was a combination of plagiarism charges and the way that they were handling anti-Semitic protests, or what were deemed as anti-Semitic protests in those universities as well. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how things play out in that space as well. And it does look like the U.S. will be reopening the border crossings as apparently illegal immigrations are dropping. So definitely the shuttered Arizona border crossing is set to reopen. So we'll see how this plays out and whether this is a good thing or not, because it does look like the U.S. is reopening 4 entry points at southern borders following a dramatic drop in immigrant crossings. So that is something else that we are seeing. And if you want to talk about somebody that has qualified to get into the president race, apparently Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has qualified for the presidential ballot in Utah, and that is the first state to grant him such a privilege. So we'll see if he gets on the ballot in other places as well. But it does look like Utah has put his name on the ballot. So we'll see if he can get on the ballot in other parts of the country as well. And the White House is asking the Supreme Court to allow cutting off Texas borders fencing. So Biden administration asked Supreme Court to allow Border Patrol to cut the Texas razor wire. So definitely, like I said, the border is a very important issue. And as I mentioned yesterday, we were talking about New Jersey, but apparently Chicago suburbs are seeking to restrict migrant drop-offs as well. So definitely this whole notion of where the migrants will go once they come across the border is definitely an interesting story as well. So definitely it'll be interesting to see. And by the way, Biden's campaign is planning a speech on democracy in Pennsylvania. So we'll see how this all goes and everything. And it is said that Biden will target Trump in the speech at a war site on January 6th anniversary. So that'll only be a few days from now, and we'll see what he says and what happens in reaction to what he says, and all along those lines. So, like I said, getting ready to get some of the other folks on the panel, see what they've got on their mind. And we've got Rick Rosner with me, so I'll definitely see what Rick has happening in his world. Definitely got Sasha Starr as well. And of course, you'll see what's going on in Ukraine. So we've always got interesting conversations. And I see Lee Newton Rhodes is in the backdrop, and hopefully he'll pop on camera at some point or another. And maybe Jacoby and others will join us as well, including the founders of the network. So I guess I'll start off with the immigrant question, and I'll get to some other ones as well. But news, or what about the fact that I guess we're opening up the borders, and apparently the amount of folks that are crossing has dropped. So we'll see if this is good news or bad news. But Rick, what's your take? You're in California.
I got to say, in general, it's too early for the world. I need the world to just hold on until I've had a chance to wake up. But people argue about the number of people who've come over and what coming over means, and the numbers are hard to pin down and can be used to mislead people. But right now, the U.S. is still less than 5% undocumented immigrants. We have the same percentage of non-native born people today, less than 14%, that we did 100 years ago. So we're not being brutally overrun. Our situation is nowhere like the EU countries, who have much higher percentages of undocumented immigrants. So a lot of it is fear mongering, mostly by Republicans. We haven't had immigration reform since 1986 under Reagan. It's a problem, but it's a problem where political paralysis because of polarization stops us from trying a bunch of new technologies and new methods that we could have developed in the 37 years since we last had legislation.
Yeah, but is it a problem just here? Is it a problem around the world? Because one of the things that I mentioned, and I'd love to definitely get Sasha's perception and everything, is that even in Israel, there's talks about where they will put the Palestinian refugees and all along those lines. And I guess they're negotiating with Congo and some other African nations and all along those lines. So it definitely seems like this idea of what to do with folks that are needing to get settled, whether they are coming across voluntarily, as the migrants here in the U.S. are, or whether they are being forced to do something because of a war effort. Because definitely they says that the U.S. has attacked the Israeli minister's statement, and I'm not sure what the statement was, about trying to place some of these folks in the Congo and other countries as part of a voluntary migration plan. And they're saying that some of, I guess, the Netanyahu's allies are under pressure and everything, because apparently France has attacked some of what they said and everything. But I'll start with you, Sasha. But definitely there are some folks that are saying that this is a form of ethnic cleansing, and even Biden is under pressure to act amid these fears and everything. But what's your thoughts around this notion of placing them in other countries? I think we even saw that in the early parts of the Ukrainian war, where there were people from the African nations that were trapped in between the war. They were in the universities, and they either tried to get back to their homelands or were sent to other European countries as well. So what is your thoughts just about what we should do with migrants or refugees in general?
This is one of the most complicated questions, because it involves not only immigration per se, but as well as racial issues and nationalistic issues and civilization issues, and just name it. When you talk about immigration, generally speaking, you must refer mostly to United States because it's an immigrants country. Canada just as well, but on much smaller scale, simply because it's a much smaller country. So if you talk about America, even when you take immigration of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, there was immigration of people from Ireland and from Italy, and even those who are generally white people, same civilization or almost same, they were perceived as something different people, and people were looking at them as something not the same, something entirely different. The Jewish immigration and but remember, from what I understand, there was no welfare state at that time in the United States. So immigrants who were coming, even if you look at the movies like The Godfather, um, they were coming to a new country and they were relying on themselves, their families, their relatives, connections, and so on, trying to get on their feet as quickly as possible. And sometimes it wasn't easy at all. But I told myself I'm an immigrant from Soviet Union, came to Canada. I had $8 in my pocket when I came, and but this my situation was different because I was getting help from Canadian government. The could pay rent and some food. I was giving help from the Toronto Jewish Community Center. So I had enough for first 6, even 8 months to get on my feet. And I was giving free courses, English as a second language, which by the time I completed this course, uh, I still, of course, I didn't know English. I think even now I don't know it well enough, unfortunately. But at that time, at least I knew I had very good basis of grammar, and I could basically read almost any book with a dictionary. And slowly I found that I don't need dictionary because even the words that I didn't know what they mean by the full sentence, I could really and when I understand the word and when I met it, the same word second, third times and so forth, I already knew what it means. And then I would check dictionary to figure out if I'm right or not. But today's situation is entirely different. Today, in the United States at least, and same in Canada, it's a welfare state where takes on all the newly arrived immigrants. And what's happened is that that was different in my time. You couldn't live in isolation and rely on only language that you would know, and you had to very quickly learn and communicate in English. In Quebec, it would be French, most likely, and from that point going on. And today, there are communities in the United States where people even bother to learn English. They don't need English. They can communicate in their own language, whether it's a Spanish, probably most likely, or some other languages. It's becoming enclaves, very similar to what's happened, for example, in France or in Germany, when they have communities of people from Middle East or Africa or from wherever else, where they live in their own communities. They don't speak either French or German, other local languages. There is another approach, for example, Poland, which is doing very well economically and otherwise. And Poland has very simple policy. Poland is for Poles only. There's one exception. It's Ukraine. They allow Ukrainian people to settle in Poland. They help them tremendously, gives them the room to stay, allow them all kind of education, free education, of course, and some But it's not even coming from government so much as from local Polish people who are accepting them in their Ukrainians and their families or so on. There was a big discussion, I remember, about how come Poland gives preference to Ukrainians and not to people from Middle East or Africa or so on. So that's racial bias and so on. And I could admit that probably that's what it is. But if Poland says that Poland is for Poles only, and that's full stop period, and at the time when European Union has very different at the time the immigration policy, Poland didn't care. And one of the reasons why United Kingdom left the European Union is because they wanted to have their own immigration policy and not to rely 100% on European Union policies. Well, that's enough. Just one question to everybody: why wouldn't the United States pay Mexicans to establish immigration zones in their, say, northern borders? So even the United States would sponsor that, and Mexican government probably would pay for them. So they would keep these people in Mexico. They would have a chance to apply normally for legalized process, how to immigrate to the United States. Probably even Canada would be interested to pick some people from these sanctuaries, and they would learn English at the same time. And maybe that would stop illegal immigration altogether. What do you think?
Sasha's right. We need to work more closely with Mexico, but Mexico's is completely compromised by the cartels, and they've moved from just drugs to immigrant smuggling, which is huge profitable business for them. But we need to look at North America as a whole, and it would be great if we could somehow work with Mexico and get their government to be more effective at the cartels, less corrupt. Mexico's has a 50-mile southern border, a border between it and its southern neighbors. The U.S. has a 2,000-mile southern border. If Mexico could get its act together, it would be much easier to patrol a 50-mile border than a 2,000-mile border. There are 600 million people south of in Central and South America, south of America, which is nearly 2 times as many people as in America. And as climate change displaces people, and there's only going to be more pressure for people to push north.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah,
and
but the thing is,
hold on a second. Rick,
we're not addressing the problem. We're trying to put a Band-Aid on the symptoms, but not the problem. The problem is failed states in Central America and failed states in Latin America. And that's where the problem lies, because a lot of these immigrants are coming from Cuba, they're coming from Venezuela, which states have basically failed. There's no food, there's no water, there's no nothing. And so they're looking at their only choices to come to America. Now, we're also looking at another problem. We have a failed state in the United States. It's called leadership. Let me ask the panel this. Have you seen the hearings on immigration by Congress today?
No hearings on that, but I do have a quick question for you. Hold on a second. I got a quick question for you. I know hearings, but I got a quick question for you based on something that Rick said earlier.
Biden, all he's doing is talking about liberty. Joe Biden, no one wants to hear about liberty. We want to hear about solutions to problems like immigration. Do we hear anything about solutions to problems like immigration? No, we don't. So what we have is laggarship. I think that's what Dave Walker
yeah, that's what he calls it and everything. But hold on a second. This is my question for everybody on the panel and everything. You said, and I heard, or Rick said it, about the cartels and everything. And I mentioned on yesterday that I had the pleasure of watching a actor that was well known, but he is definitely tied up into the government and definitely has some ties to government friends. And I think that later on today, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, they will be releasing the names of those that were involved with Epstein, which is human trafficking. And
I've heard that the release of the names has been delayed until the 22nd, but I'm not sure.
So then maybe they delayed that list and everything. But my question to you is that we keep talking about the cartel, and the cartel is in Mexico. And I'm not arguing that the cartel is a very dangerous thing that is in Mexico and other parts of Latin America as well. But one of the things that this particular actor, Damon Wilson, brought up is that apparently you can't be successful. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was arguing that you can't really be successful in Hollywood unless you are quote unquote mobbed up. And he even pointed back to the old days of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and a number of others.
That's ridiculous.
There is a very popular restaurant here in this area, and I'm sure I could point to some in New York and everything else that are very successful. And it is a not well hidden secret that they have mob ties and everything along those lines. So
one of the problems with the West Coast is
with crime here in the U.S. as well.
The problem with the West Coast is the lack of organized crime. I've worked in bars for 25 years. In New York, if you wanted to stay open after hours, if there were people you could pay off. In LA, there's much less organized crime, and if your bar's being harassed for I worked in a bar that was in a rich neighborhood. And they didn't like having a bar there, and they would have the alcohol cops come in and harass us for ridiculous reasons like fruit flies and a bottle of booze. But in LA, there's no mob you could pay off to make the cops quit bugging you. And no, so the mobbed up is not a thing for LA.
I think that was the thing of the past. But when we're looking at the immigration problem, it is a federal issue. And the thing is, when we're looking at the federal government, you look toward a leader. The leader is Joe Biden. And Joe Biden apparently doesn't have a plan. So next you look to the other branch, the legislative branch, which is Congress. And they have no hearings on it. So here we have, which is potentially the most serious issue in the United States in 2024. And we have no leadership in Washington even addressing solutions to the problem, let alone identifying what the problem is. So the simplistic minds that generally come from the Republican Party say just build a wall and life will be good. Well, not realizing that most of the illegal immigrants come because they have valid visas. They come to the United States and they basically overstay their stay. And so the thing is, it's not a solution, but there's no conversation on what the problems are and the solutions coming from our leadership in Washington, D.C. Without having leadership in Washington, D.C., you have chaos, which exists in the border. Yeah, Rick.
So, the one solution is surveillance and tracking of every immigrant to the country. And, everybody has a surveillance device that keeps track of them all the time, right in their hand. Your smartphone, keeps track of you. We need new solutions. That reflect the changes that have happened since the last time we had immigration reform, or just stick a freaking chip in people. I know that sounds like dystopian, but if we're gonna freak out about
dog, I chip the dog so that we can find the dog if the dog's lost.
Right, and what do you can either freak out and say, well, there's no way of keeping track of people, or you can freaking keep track of people. And we have room for a certain amount of immigration. The rate of population growth in the U.S. over the past 10 years, including immigrants, is at the lowest it's been in history. I mean, we don't want to let frickin' everybody in, but it's not the end of the world problem that some people would make it out to be.
But Rick, along those same lines, I would imagine that, and I'll get to another issue that is in another part of the world and everything, but I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've not done enough world travel, as I've said several times on this show and this network and everything, but there are thousands of doctors that have walked out in Britain, in which they're saying is the longest ever strike. And I imagine that quite a few of these doctors that walked off were from other countries, because I do know that those in Britain have a lot of doctors that are coming from Indian countries. From the country or the area of India, as well as coming from African nations and coming from a number of other places. I would imagine that even there, that a number of these folks that are walking off in their strike, and they're saying that is the longest ever strike, that could definitely impact the health care there, and they're saying that it's providing a major headache for their leadership and everything. I would imagine that those folks are definitely going to be coming from other parts of the world and even getting their medical training. You just alluded to it, Nick. That's quite a few of the people here. As y'all know, I live near Duke. Quite a few of these doctors that are in training are coming from all over the world, and then they are supposed to go back to those countries, but that doesn't always stay the case and everything. There's even
those people are great to have.
Our quote unquote enemies and everything, because I do know there are a number of folks that I have met that literally are from China, and they're down here getting medical training and everything in that space. But what is our thoughts, one, about the strike? And am I correct in thinking that a lot of these folks were already at an advantage because they were coming from other countries to get their medical training?
Well, those people are great to have come to your country if you can keep them once they get trained, because the U.S. has 4% of the world's population. We want the best of the remaining 96% of the world to come here, get trained, and add their talents to the country. Not everybody in the world, but obviously, it's, if somebody's smart enough and hardworking enough to get admitted to med school, that's somebody you probably want in the country.
Right. But my understanding is the NH1 or whatever that designation
National
is.
Health Service.
No,
it's the HB1 visa.
Thank you. Those folks that get that particular visa are usually from ally countries like India and other things, and they are supposed to be here in many cases for a limited amount of time, but they wind up staying over even longer than they're supposed to, because in some cases they're supposed to be going back to their home countries. That was part of the arrangement, and it doesn't always work out that way and everything. And I think that they are treated differently than the ones we're talking about coming from Mexico. And these are folks usually that are working jobs that in many times our own native born people don't want to work those jobs in the first place and everything, whether that's housekeeping, whether that's restaurant jobs, whether that's a number of other jobs that they choose to go into and everything. So are we treating the immigrants the same when they are coming over for different reasons, whether that's here or whether that's in London or whether that's in a number of other countries as well?
No, Mark, because it's a mess. I mean, I've had people that work for my company. We had one that came on an HB1 visa. We had to pay an immigration attorney to get her cleared. She actually came in from Canada, Sasha. So we hired a person who was from Canada, but because she was from Canada, we had to go through this huge HB1 process. Finally got her in, and she worked for my company for quite some time. Then we had another person who came in from South Africa, and we hired her, and she stayed with us for 10 years. She came through the legal immigration process. It took her 10 years to become a citizen. She came in from Durban, South Africa, and it was a pain in the neck. She did not like the illegal immigrants because it's a skip the line process. They skip the line and all of a sudden, they're here and they're getting jobs. But to work in jobs in companies like ours, they had to be legitimate. And so she had to go through that process. What we have at the border isn't anything like that. What you have is massive amounts of people who are leaving countries on failed states run by dictators, with American foreign policy making their situation bad go to worse, like what we're seeing in Venezuela, which has the largest oil reserves in the world. So why are these people leaving here? Well, unfortunately, they have a dictatorship by a socialistic person who took over all the oil fields. And the minute he did that and said everybody's going to get paid the same, little peonies, all the top oil people quit and they left. So now they have the biggest.
Now to be fair against Venezuela, there is a very conservative government that is also in Latin America that is as corrupt. Some people have said that its leadership is even worse than Trump and everything.
Yeah, but the thing is, those people aren't leaving to come here, Mark. That's Brazil.
Brazil has got some issues as well.
They're not leaving to come here. It's the ones that, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, it's the ones from the socialistic countries and these countries that have basically dictators. they're the ones that are leaving.
But Nick, I have to disagree with you.
Venezuela-
There are quite a few folks that I can name, to at least just in my friend circle, 5 or 6 people that I know that have left from Brazil because of the right-wing kind of government. So you cannot say that they're not. They are only leaving from leftist countries. They are leaving from very reactionary countries as well.
I got two people who left from Brazil. I got 200,000 who left from Venezuela. So what? You know, the thing is, the vast majority are coming from 2 countries, Venezuela and Cuba. Now, Cuba, last time I looked, is a communist dictatorship. Venezuela is a socialist dictatorship. The United States policies is to squeeze these countries because they hate them. And when they squeeze these countries by embargoes and tariffs and all this other stuff, it takes a bad situation and makes it worse. So guess what? The U.S. bought and paid for this. So you've got a couple choices, and they're hard choices. They're hard choices not by a softie like Joe Biden. Number one, you go in, you clean them out. Okay? Seriously. I know it's brutal, but we did not with Iraq. Number two, you open the doors and say, okay, you won, your trade's free. You can go to Cuba and go to Venezuela, and we're going to support their dictatorship. So those are your choices. If you choose number three, which is do nothing, then what you have is a border crisis, which is what you have right now. So the United States has bought and paid for this by their very poor policy. So
also drug policy. We wouldn't have the cartels if we'd figured out how to deal with drugs more effectively.
Yeah, that's true. Again, that's back to poor policy. We're the ones that have to control the drug trade, not have the cartels control it. Part of it is to legalize it, not make it a crime, and control it and tax it. You know, 100,000 people died of fentanyl, but see, our policies obviously don't work. Criminalizing fentanyl does not work. We have demonstrated over and over again. Criminalizing cannabis does not work. And so the thing is, what we have, and have you seen Congress's hearing? No. Instead, what they do is they're going to have a hearing and bring up the professors from Harvard and ask them whether or not they, anti-Semitism revolves around campus. You know why? Because that's an easy answer question. And obviously, our top educational guys couldn't get this right. So if our top educational institutions can't get a simple question right, how can they get something complex like immigration and drug control correct? They can't. So what they do is they pass on it, and you see no hearings at all on immigration, no hearings at all on drugs, because that's a tough question, and we do not have tough leaders.
This is the second least effective House of Representatives in history.
Well, you're right, Rick. What you said is correct. It's the least effective House of Representatives in history.
And so they just lost. They're losing another Republican. So the Republican margin, the majority is going to be down to 2 or 3 people. So they're going to get even less done, except for like BS impeachment hearings over the next year. We've got another year of stalemate.
Yeah, and so the thing is, this is what we're getting. And you know what the media does? They do nothing. They don't report on it. They don't call attention to that. Instead, we're talking about Japanese airlines that crash. Okay, that's great. But let me tell you, a whole country that's crashing because of the immigration borders, that is a real problem. The drug is a real problem. And so the media doesn't want to address it. Congress doesn't want to address it. The executive branch doesn't want to address it. But just because you don't want to address it doesn't mean the problem.
Yeah, CNN has a boner for plane wrecks. They love when the Malaysian Airlines it was all plane wreck all the time.
Hey,
along those lines, and by the way, there are a couple of countries. It's not just Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela, but apparently there are some other countries that have had skyrocketing numbers, including as the 2 you mentioned, Cuba, Venezuela, but also Nicaragua and Haiti. And there are definitely people that are saying that all of those countries have faced various crises in terms of their leadership and all in that space. But while Mexico and Central America still remain major sources of migration to the U.S., according to some data from some of our government agencies, Mexico and Guatemala were the top 2 countries for migration, but Honduras is the 4th country. And definitely it does look like the so-called Northern Triangle countries alone, which is El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras accounted for more than 541,000 migrant encounters, which was almost a quarter of the historic nearly 2.4 million encounters. And we don't hear people talking about those countries as much either, because some of those countries are allied countries, and some of them are also countries that we have laid in bed with for whatever reasons and everything. And even to the point, I've heard some people that have talked about an influx of migrants coming in from the European nations, particularly Ukraine, that has been involved in this horrible war for now 2 years and all along those lines. So that is something else that is going on as well. But the question I had for everybody on the panel is, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I think our good friend David Walker talks about it oftentimes on his show and everything. But apparently on the 6th, which is only a few days away, I believe that's on a Saturday and everything, Biden will be in a hotbed of democracy, that being Pennsylvania, if we want to talk about from a historic standpoint and everything along those lines, talking about democracy. So that's going to be his conversation, is democracy, I guess not just here, but around the world as well. So is democracy under threat and all along those lines? So what is that?
Will it change anybody's minds? The last time he made a speech, the lighting, they had red, white, and blue lighting. The last time he made a major political speech, and the way they framed it, there was just red lighting around it, and all the right wing just presented him as looking satanic. So just because of a lighting screw up, the message was lost. And
and he's talking about the wrong message. There are some real issues in the United States that we're discussing. Here's one: immigration. Will he discuss that? No. How about abortion? Is he going to discuss that? No. What about guns? Is he going to discuss that? No. What about fentanyl? Is he going to discuss that? No. So the thing is, what is he going to discuss? Liberty. Give me a break. No wonder why you're going to lose the election, Joe. It's the thing is, you cannot grasp one tough issue.
No, hold on a second. I know that. Hold on a second. I thought you Toby and everything, but at the last time that he did a State of the Union, he actually did speak about fentanyl. He actually did speak about the gun crisis and a couple of the other things that you said he doesn't discuss. He did discuss at the last State of the Union, as I recall, and everything.
Yeah,
but
that was one of his best speeches, Mark. That was one of his best speeches. And now the thing is, he's moving it toward personality, and because I guess his handlers told him to go that direction, and this is where he's going to fail, and Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. Not because people like Donald Trump, people hate Donald Trump. It's because they hate Joe Biden even more.
Here's the problem, though, and every little bit of your answer, Lee, is coming off of that problem. Rick actually pointed out how impotent and feckless and useless this Congress has been. This Congress has passed maybe about 12 pieces of legislation since it was actually put into office from last year. How can everything, and this is our problem as our society, how can Joe Biden put forth and actually have the immigration fixed, the immigration situation where he's put together a solution and actually asked for money and actually went to the public and told the public, hey, look, we need money to do this, that, and the other thing. How can he put together and fix this fentanyl problem if Congress won't pass a bill? But yet we're blaming everything on Joe, saying, oh, well, he can't negotiate this, he can't negotiate that. Well, when you have the House of Representatives, which has, again, passed maybe 12 pieces of legislation over the whole year, and actually one of those pieces was actually two of them were to have a Speaker of the House. So how can you literally put everything on Joe when it is the GOP itself which is tanking not only immigration, because they've said that they did not want to give Joe Biden a win, so therefore they don't want to give him the money for actually legislation on the wall. They don't want to give Joe Biden a win for the fentanyl crisis. Doesn't want to give Joe Biden a win for the money towards Ukraine, money towards Israel and stuff like that. He doesn't. The GOP is literally tanking the government, and the actual media has pushed this out. But half of the country itself is listening to a lot of right-wing media, which actually does exactly what you are saying. Well, Joe Biden can't do anything. Well, how can he, and when he actually does do stuff and does this executive order, he's being sold as a tyrant. Oh, he's doing things unilaterally, and he's attacking and he's stealing, but he's doing exactly what you wanted him to do. But now you're saying that he can't do anything because the GOP won't allow him to do anything, but he can't do anything because he can't fix the wall, he can't fix immigration, but there's no money. He can't just do it unilaterally because when he does that, you attack him for that. So how in this win-win, this lose-lose situation, can he do anything if the GOP within itself is literally tanking the government
So
Joe Biden doesn't win?
The Democrats are bad at messaging, and the media is complicit because they're very lazy and they only go with they do very little analysis, and there's a lot of both sides. But the Republicans may screw themselves. The Fifth Circuit Court down in Texas, a very lunatic, Trumpy court, just ruled that in Texas, doctors are not legally obligated to save your life if you have a pregnancy that is killing you. And people are pissed about that, and that may save Biden.
It'd be interesting to see how that plays out and everything along those lines.
Well,
I did have, just switching the topic, we still got a few more minutes to go and everything, but I did have a question because some people will be finding it somewhat ironic because I'm going to change the topic just slightly, but we had talked earlier about the Israeli war and all along those lines. And apparently South Africa is bringing a case of genocide against Israel, and that's in the UN. I know there are a number of folks here on the network are not big fans of the UN, but some folks would find it ironic that South Africa, of all people, is the one that is laying this case, as we all know about South Africa's history with apartheid and everything. So just wondering y'all's take around that and whether this will be an issue that could change the election and everything. So Sasha, I'll turn it over to you. That's why I brought the question up, because definitely it's South Africa that's filing this case. So your thoughts around this particular case and everything.
This one is very easy. Obviously, United Nations is a completely useless, impotent, anti-Semitic organization. I'm surprised that Israel hasn't left it a long time ago, and it's probably a good time to leave it now. I think United States have to leave this organization and ban it on U.S. territory and get them all out of the New York fabulous building, and just ignore all this, whatever they have, the verdicts or whatever else they can come up with, the resolutions or whatever. I think in the movie Golda, that was very well said when what's his name, Kissinger was trying to urge her to stop the Israel's attack during the later stage of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when Israeli army was almost at the less than a day away from Cairo and Lebanon, Jordan, and he urged her to quit and stop this attack because there will be notes of protests from United Nations and so on. And she answered, it's better to have note of protests than condolences. And that was her famous phrase. It's still valid today.
And it makes a lot of sense. Everything. I don't know if Jacoby or anybody else, or even Rick, has got any thoughts. But the other thing that the UN apparently is doing is that they're going to meet today to talk about the Red Sea, which we know is a very important port, and there's been all kinds of attacks, and people are talking about the expansion of that particular conflict, and it is now involving the Houthis and a number of other folks as well. So apparently they are going to have this whole conversation around the security and protecting the Red Sea, because it is a vital port out there and all along those lines. So is this going to be a widening conflict? It'll widen even further in 2024 as more and more factions and factors get involved in this particular conflict. So anybody got any thoughts around this?
Russia would love it to widen because it increases the chances that Trump will win. But there's still 10 months until the election. Israel holds 2/3 of northern Gaza. It's unlikely that the active, super killy phase of the war will continue for more than another couple months. Netanyahu maintains a political advantage. He's threatened. He's got low approval, and he's been accused of ignoring intelligence about the attack. But he may want the war to go on, for longer than it might have to protect him in office. But even so, I can't imagine that the active phase of the war will continue long enough to get to the general election in America.
Yeah, there's what Rick is talking about. Yeah, what happened in Lebanon could definitely widen the war due to the fact of an attack on a different country's land and how the Houthis and everybody else respond to it being on their land now. And I think Rick is right. Netanyahu, I mean, it's true. Netanyahu's numbers are in the tank right now, and they were in the tank before the war, and they spiked a little bit, but they're going back in the tank right now. But he may, as Rick said, may want it to last a little longer. But yes, it may. Why this attack on Lebanon, or the attack on the Hamas leader in Lebanon, may widen the war a little bit due to the fact of what other factions live in that country. If they respond, yeah, it's just we're at a tipping point. And the UN, honestly, the UN is actually a great organization, just like how they're fighting the US. The UN is actually fighting the US to get money towards Ukraine. The UN has done a lot of humanitarian work in Ukraine to help the individuals and the neighboring countries there. So the UN, I completely disagree about disbanding or no. The UN is actually a good organization. It needs better support and better management because yes, it has corrupt elements just like every other country and so on and so forth. But again, it's actually an organization that does some good. And
obviously we don't want this, but attacks on U.S. interests and U.S. ships may actually help Biden. After 9/11, Bush's approval rating rose to 95%, the highest ever since they've started doing approval ratings. And it's a different time. And whatever happens, the Republicans will say this wouldn't have happened under Trump, and it's because Biden's weak. But if we have to defend ourselves more actively in the Gulf, it may cause America to pull together a very tiny bit.
Yeah, but along those same lines, and this is the question I had for everybody, but particularly you, Rick, and you, Sasha, because I know that y'all are both of the Jewish faith and everything. But one of the criticisms that I've heard about Netanyahu is that he is definitely ultra conservative and all along those lines. And apparently there have been some cases that are even in his own government that are threatening him. Because I want to say that there was a Supreme Court decision that did not go his way and all along those lines. So I didn't know if y'all had any thoughts around this and everything, because I just read this recently that there was a case that he had won that a lot of people that are his supporters were glad about. But now that he has lost this case, there is, to what Toby is saying, some people that are fearing that his support in that country is sliding to some degree and everything.
He's been for more than a year, he's been trying to weaken the Supreme Court, and there have been mass protests throughout Israel. And just yesterday, I don't know the specifics, some of his proposal to weaken the court failed.
Yeah, and that's what I'd heard was that it would weaken the court, and definitely some of these cases, including some of the cases that might even have to do with the military action that Israel took, and rightfully so, and everything might come before those courts.
And I'm sure he has some good people in his cabinet, but he also has some very right-wing assholes. Like the U.S. has had Stephen Miller under Trump. They've got, a couple of their cabinet members are assholes at the level of Stephen Miller.
Yeah. Any thoughts around that, Sasha, and everything? Because like I said, I do know that you've been following both the Ukrainian war as well as that war in the Middle East. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts about this decision that was made in terms of the Supreme Court there of Israel.
Well, I think that a war situation in a country changes a lot of things, whether you want it or not. For example, in Ukraine, there were calls, actually even from United States, to call an election so Zelensky would get a fresh mandate to rule the country. And Ukrainian people rejected that. They said it's even in Ukrainian constitution, there is no election during the war. And I think the same thing applies to Israel. Netanyahu, there are two Netanyahus. One is a war leader, which is supported now by majority of people and politicians and so on. And there will be another Netanyahu once the war is over. And he's definitely, he will lose power. Most likely he will be indicted, and it will be again different situation. So you have to always play the situation during the war, situation after war, both in Israel and Ukraine.
And even around the world, because I think that that's what we're seeing in India, because I did see that an Indian court declined a new inquiry against a billionaire. And some folks are saying that that is more than vindication for the person that was on the hot seat, which was Gautam Adani. And he says that the truth has prevailed after the top court orders regulators to wrap up their probe, because apparently there was a probe into some of his decisions and all along those lines, and it was called the Hindenburg Order. But it does look like he has won that case. But of course, India is not in a as big of a military conflict as some of these other countries are, and all along those lines. So that might have been a different case if he had been involved in something that was a little bit more of the kind of conflict-based government and everything. So definitely, I think that he is a case in point of what you're talking about, that things are changed when you have that and all along those lines. I know we're going to wrap up, but apparently there is, and because I know it's something else we talk about in the news as well, but apparently there is expansion of BRICS, which is something we talk about. And that even comes back to the countries, some of the countries, like and the one that I mentioned, which is Brazil, and of course one that you are very involved in, Sasha, with Russia and everything. But apparently it is to grow as both Saudi, Iran, UAE, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Ethiopia have joined the ranks of BRICS. So those are some, in some ways, economic powerhouses as well. So
Bravo, Ethiopia.
Huh?
Bravo, Ethiopia.
So you're saying it's good for Ethiopia to join? Well, what about the UAE? The UAE is definitely a major economic power and all along those lines, and the Saudis are.
Welcome to a great organization which includes a country like Russia, which is led by war criminal. So welcome to the rank of BRICS or whatever it might be.
So the more we become energy self-sufficient, the less those a-hole countries can mess with us. And we're drilling more oil than ever before in America. And we're also developing alternative sources of energy. And we just need to push forward on that. And the more we do that, the less, not in the near future, but in the medium future, the less, the UAE and the other Gulf countries that produce oil can mess with us.
But hey, Rick, along the same lines and everything, don't sometimes other conflicts and some of those war conflicts, the reason that some of these nations get pushed into these agreements? I just mentioned earlier that Ethiopia just gave a access, Red Sea access, and Somaliland is, which is a breakaway Somali region. And of course, they've been at conflict Ethiopia with other countries like Eritrea and everything. But I don't
know, all those E countries are like are barely functional, have barely functioning government. I'm guessing. Maybe somebody knows better than me, but it's, you know, maybe the most functioning government, big government in the world is frickin' China.
Mhm.
China has a dictatorship, an entrepreneurial dictatorship. You know, it's the same time all throughout China. Like that place is 4,000 miles wide, and they have no time zones. They have one frickin' time zone. Those people get bossed around. They are industrializing. They're high tech. You know, if India ever gets its government together, they will become as big a threat to world leadership as China.
Well, he's talking about world leadership. Apparently, Governor Parson, who's over there in Missouri, gave an executive order over foreign-owned farmland. So he has banned Chinese and Russian companies from buying land near military sites, which actually that makes a lot of sense and everything. But definitely that is what he's doing. He's saying he's going to ban the sale of farmland near military.
That's super big garbage, because when you look at the percent of land that's been purchased by Chinese interests, it's like some like teeny tiny fraction of 1/10 of 1%. That's just like that's looking for, you know, it's demagoguing. It's looking for a BS issue to get people like, you know, I mean, there are a ton of issues with China. China's a huge threat, but China buying little chunks of land here and there is not in the top 10 threats from China.
But even China itself has admitted that they have some issues within their own government. I think that right in the New Year's message that the Chinese leader gave, he basically said that they needed to open up their society and that they were threatening or facing some threats of kind of having an economic decline and all along those lines. I think that I know that both China and other countries, including Russia, were encouraging their folks to have more children and all along those lines, where they used to have the one-child policy and all in that space. So is this great country of China going to be facing some turmoil in the year of 2024?
Well, Sasha knows better, because Sasha knows how economies work. But at some point, the world is going to have to switch over from economies based on steadily increasing population to, you know, economic systems that are built around, at some point in this century, the world's population will plateau. And, you know, you can't sex your way out of every problem by having more babies. You know, it's going to be robots instead of babies, and it's going to be a different economy.
Yeah, well, he's admitted that there's some tough times for the enterprises and the jobs there, and he's apparently rung in 2024 with a rare admission from the Chinese government that their government or their economy is in trouble. So definitely that is something that I guess that they're going to have to deal with, and all along those lines. And and this one Sasha will find interesting, which I did not get to, but the EU has added Russia's biggest diamond producer, Alrosa, to its sanctions list. I know we've talked about sanctions before, but apparently the EU has banned Russian diamonds. So if anybody is watching and hoping to get Russian diamonds and they're in the EU, they might not be having
diamonds are a super dirty business. Diamonds are ridiculous. Diamonds have been dirty for more than 100 years, and they're a goofy commodity now, because now we have the technology to make perfect frickin' diamonds as big as you want. You don't need to dig them out of the ground anymore.
They're not necessary. But we have another technical problem, is that we're at the hour. So,
no, we're that word, but just really quickly, and I'll wrap up the show at this note on everything. But I'm glad you come back, Nick, because I've got to tease you, because you sometimes talk about non-useful majors and everything, and this is a sad news from one of those non-useful majors, and I'll end with your thoughts around this. But apparently there was a student that was accused of murder after running over her fiance in a card game, because apparently they were playing a game of chicken and all along those lines. So she apparently dragged him 300 feet for allegedly flirting with another woman as they were playing this game of chicken. But this is where I was going to get to you and everything, because apparently her major that she was studying philosophy. So I knew you've got something to say about this when it is a philosophy student that is accused of this horrible crime. And
I got like, okay, so Harvard gets accused of being this elite place where people get bullshit degrees that aren't worth anything. Half of the people at Harvard, fully half, are in STEM majors. So like that accusation that people aren't getting useful majors is at elite colleges is BS. People know where the jobs are, and you know.
And ironically, this was not here. This was actually in London because she had received a scholarship for a master's at Cambridge. And we do know that Cambridge is kind of like the Harvard of London. And she is denied murder and an alternative count of manslaughter, as she claimed her boyfriend's death was a tragic accident. But I don't know why you'd be playing chicken with anybody in the first place and everything with a car. But that sounds like that could be going bad either way you look at it and everything. But definitely, I'm sure people will be taking a pot crack at her major, as well as the fact that they were playing the game of chicken with a car.
Okay. And now we can end the show, Mark?
That we could end the show.
Well,
Jacoby has a good joke to go with that because I know Jacoby's got some good humor as well.
okay.
Welcome to Modern Investing at 1 o'clock.
Yes,
Modern
modern
investment.
investment, 1 o'clock.
Right.
There's
Okay.
very interesting things happening on the stock markets, and particularly in the US. And we will definitely analyze what's happening.
All right. And we will see everybody then. And also visit the Pod TV store. Bye-bye.
Bye.